Good morning. This is the BLAINESWORLD Show, heard each week on Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn. And we'll also be having a podcast available in the near future. I'm your host, Blaine Greenfield, and I'm here in my Zoom studio in Fairview, North Carolina. And each week we focus on the Asheville theater scene, as well as on positive news and information about people and organizations in both Western North Carolina and throughout the country. And toward that end, it's my pleasure to introduce my first two guests, and they are Chuck, Fink, and Ray Christian. And welcome aboard, guys. You can wave to all your fans and friends who are watching you. So those are Chuck and Ray. I should mention that Ray is a well-known and respected storyteller, professor at Appalachian State University, and retired Army paratrooper. He lives in Boone, North Carolina, with his wife, children, dogs, and chickens. And I should get this right, Ray. You mentioned you have more than a couple. Is that correct?
Yes, more than a couple.
Okay, more than a couple. He produces the podcast What's Ray Saying, which features stories born out of his own life experiences, inner city poverty, race relations, military, family, travel, and adventure. Chuck began his storytelling career in 2013 at 53 years of age. He produces shows in the Weaverville Community Center and tells stories throughout the region. Prior to retiring from Fink Incorporated consulting firm out of Cincinnati, Chuck used storytelling to keep people awake I love it, during his training sessions for more than 30 years. And that's, you were able to keep him awake for most of the time?
Most of the time, yeah. And if not, I would have a foghorn that would wake him up.
Well, that would do it. Well, let me ask you both this question, and I'll start with Ray. Ray, as a kid, you grew up where?
In Richmond, Virginia, in a part of Richmond called Church Hill. That was the oldest part of the city.
Okay. And when you were growing up in Richmond, Virginia, did you know you wanted to be a storyteller?
I did not. I had no awareness that that was a thing. I knew I had a habit of trying to explain things. You know, there are stories of good and there are stories of evil, and then there's stories, just information stories. So that often translates to you just talk too much. So no, in no formal way when I was at that age that I was thinking anything like that was even conceivable. It evolved over decades.
So when did you realize all of a sudden you were going to become a storyteller?
The quick answer would be I started listening to stories on, it's after I'd retired from the Army, I started listening to stories on the radio, then later on podcast. And people would often say to me that I had a strange life, unusual life. And some of the stories that I would tell about my life could be compared to some of the stories I was hearing on the radio. So that made me think maybe I could be a storyteller. So I started pitching story ideas to pretty much every prominent radio show that I probably heard on public radio, not public radio, but stage shows, everything. And when they were all universally rejected for the most part. This is because there was one lesson I didn't get, and that was follow the instructions. You know, first of all, I know nothing about that. You know, I was thinking, okay, that's what your instructions say. This is what I want to give to you. You know, I didn't understand. No, they don't. No, you can't do that. So I was universally getting stories rejected. And probably when I got up to about 34, 35, these are stories that I had like written out. Of course, writing stories is different than speaking stories, performing stories. So I got to about 35 or so stories. I pitched to various shows multiple times, universally rejected. And I had this one story that combined a whole bunch of bad things from when I was a kid that I never really talked about, that I wanted to just put out there. And so I was thinking to myself, I'm going to pitch this one last story that, you know, the hell with it. Maybe I don't do this. I can't do this. You know, if anything was to be made available to me, it may be traditional radio at best, but I was already aging out of the point where people were retiring from radio. I hadn't even got in. You know, I don't know where I would be right now, you know. So that one show I pitched, it was called Risk. It's a podcast, but I really wasn't aware of that. And they accepted the story. And not only did they take the story, they let me know that they were actually coming to coming to North Carolina, where I live, Chapel Hill actually, and they were doing a live show. So not only did they accept the story pitch, they wanted me to be on the stage telling the story. So kind of like in one fatal swoop, after all those rejections, I got that opportunity. But the thing is, when I did that, and I kind of sent that out to some people, a good number of those shows that originally told me absolutely no, they came to me. And ironically, that was my first interactions with the Moth main stage. Never done a slam, never done anything. The arc was I told that one story, then the Moth heard that story, and then it kind of spread from there. And then I had the idea, maybe I could do this. But still, there was another leapfrog because one doesn't really make you a storyteller. You know, it's consistency, speaking to all different types of people, doing a little bit of everything to kind of exercise your story brain. Short stories, long stories, complicated stories, convoluted stories, stories off the cuff, uh, which is what I try to practice as much as I can, and is not to be scripted. I'm familiar enough with my own life that I can be comfortable speaking about it. In that regard, age is a major advantage with storytelling because you come to the game already with a whole, decades worth of life already. So there's never an issue of you having to create. Do I ever remember? It's more like how many times did I fall in love? How many times was my heart broken? How many times was I mad? Been in a fight, fell in the bathtub? How many times I've had sex in the car, back of the car, round the car? How many times? Yeah. So age was to my advantage when it came to the body of stories I could tell. Then I started getting the idea from there, branching out into different places I could tell stories.
And so you also now not only tell stories all over, but you also now in your college teaching. Do you teach storytelling?
Well, I was teaching a class at App State called Storytelling Life in the Narrative. It's always full. So I did that for probably a decade at App State. So
Yeah.
it was a pretty popular course.
So kind of segue into Chuck's background as well. So Chuck, also you mentioned that you only got into storytelling, I guess, not that long ago. Talk about how you got into the field.
Well, first of all, I have to tell your audience that I define storytelling as BSing with an attitude, and I'm well capable of both. But I had a career at storytelling. I've always had a notion of wanting to get in front of audiences, whether it's acting, comedy. And then finally, I realized, took a class on storytelling, and I realized the most important thing about telling personal stories. That is, no one knows what you forgot to say. So, as we age, and sometimes the memory isn't always there, we'll miss a line. It's all right. You just keep on going because no one realizes that. But I have to tell you, I love storytelling mostly because of the people I meet, people like Ray. In all these other vocal art forms, whether it's acting or comedy, there's always competition. There's always kind of envy. Not so with storytellers. I met Ray, I guess it was about 2015 or 16, and we just struck up a friendship. And Ray is as genuine and as warm a human being as you're ever going to find. Ray, you now owe me $50.
Well,
No,
see,
I'm being very sincere. He's a tremendous human being.
Well, you and I had even talked about the fact that you had tried acting, did some acting, you also did some comedy, and the beauty, like you said, is you didn't have to memorize. And I want to talk about that process a little bit. A script anymore, right? You could kind of go any direction you want. And I want to ask both of you that point. So when you tell a story, do you write it out beforehand? Do you rehearse it? How does that process work? Maybe let me ask Ray that first. So you're going to tell a story. Do you write it out longhand? Do you then rehearse it 27 times, or you just kind of deliver it as it goes?
well, I'm going to give you I'm going to answer that question, and I'm going to actually finish it up with a story to illustrate the point I wanted to make about that.
Great.
I write stories in the sense that they're written for me to speak them. So if you were to read them, they may not completely make sense. They're not written in complete sentences. I may say things like, from the top, how it started, pause. And then we went there, pause. And it may only be written like that. Most of my stories that are written out are just transcripts of stories that I may have told. So it's a totally different skill set to write stories and to speak those stories. But I try to grab my stories from the things that happen around me, just how you relate to people. And me and Chuck kind of bonded together over something actually has nothing to do with stories at all, but it was a situation that he was dealing with in his family, you know, with the loss of a cat that he had for a very, very long time. Now, when I heard that, that touched me immediately because I have a special relationship with animals, and I'm very aware of a special kind of hell that people who love animals will deal with, and that is longevity. Even the best kept domestic animals rarely get over 20 years.
Right.
So no matter how well kept they are and how much you love them, you have pets, you will live to see them die. And not just once, but twice, 3 times, 4 times. When you have pets, it's like you kind of like, it's hard to tell people space them out, but you see a lot of people get a lot of loving pets within a few years of each other. And as they grow older, they'll watch them pass away, you know, one after another. It's heartbreaking, but it's part of life. Now, I don't know if you know what it's like to grow up in a place where the only real measure of your worth is your physical appearance, like I did. Um, but I did manage to have one friend when I was, even though it was a dilapidated ghetto called Churchill, and he had brown eyes and brown hair and a habit of licking his own scrotum because the guy was an animal, you know, a real animal. I'm talking about a dog. His name was Max. He was my best friend in the world. You know, he didn't judge me. I figured that he just loved me more than anything, like I loved him. But one day I came home and seems like Max decided to take a little journey, go on a trip. He'd break out and see the world. He ran away. And as dogs do in the city, they just run, trying to avoid cars, lots of dangers in the city for dogs. So I searched for hours and hours and hours trying to look for Max and didn't see him anywhere. Sometimes I'd see like something, a shadow of something, turn around the corner and I'd yell out because there are lots of stray dogs and cats in the area where I lived. It was never him. After about 3 or 4 hours, I spotted him near the exit ramp of the highway. And being a playful dog that he was, as soon as I would yell at him and say, Max, come here, Max, he would just start sticking out his tongue and you know, and bark. And then he would run a little bit, about 5 feet, and then he would stop, turn around, and go, Max, come here, Max. And he would like run from me. He's just playing, jumping up and down, bouncing like dogs do when they're so happy. And then he ran away from me, and he ran straight up the exit ramp from the highway. And I watched a car hit Max and throw him across the highway. And right then, for me, it was like a fog had settled down on the world. I really couldn't hear the sound of the cars honking and the brakes squealing, swerving. And I didn't care. I just walked out there into the highway and picked up my friend. He was bleeding. The bone was sticking out of his leg. And every time I would stumble or move him too much, he would shiver. He would just squeal a little bit in pain. And I walked with Max all the way down to the end of the beginning of that exit ramp. And in that area where that exit ramp was, there were a lot of office buildings. And that time in the afternoon, people were getting off work. I mean, hundreds and hundreds of people, well-dressed people, you know, walking, to their cars, moving quick, got their bags in the hand, just moving. And here I was, this dirty little black kid. I'm bloody. I got this mangled dog in my hands, and I'm pathetic because I don't know what to do. I don't even, my mind's not even in a good place. I'm just sitting there with this bloody dog, and people are walking up on me, and they're trying to avoid me. They're shocked, they're stunned. They don't want to look at me in the eyes. They just want to avoid the whole situation. And while I was looking down, I noticed a pair of shoes stopped right there. Shiny pair of clean shoes. And inside those shoes was a white man. A white man wearing a blue suit. He was well groomed, white shirt, red tie. He smelled like cologne. He had a gold watch. And he said, "What do you need?" And I kind of sniffled and said, I just want to go home with my dog. He said, "Okay, I'll be right back." And he left. And of course, he's not coming back. I didn't even know why he stopped. I'm not even thinking about him no more until a car pulls up and the window rolls down and it's the white man. He says, "Get in the front seat, put the dog in your lap, and tell me where you want to go." Now, this is improbable for a whole bunch of reasons in the early 1970s, that this white man is going to let a black kid get in his car, the front seat of his new car, and put his mangled dog in his lap. Ain't going to take me home? When I told him where I lived, that alone should have made him say, "Not a chance." But as we drove to my house, he didn't say a word, didn't mention anything about all the dilapidated buildings and houses. He didn't say nothing about all the street lights being out, the garbage on the street, groups of guys standing on the corner, not a word, not a mention. Pulled me up to the house, and he said, "Good luck with your dog." Well, Max didn't make it. He died. But this event was so important to me, even back then. I wanted to make sure that I never forgot it. I wanted to put it in my mind. I wanted to write it, indite it, print it, paint it, stamp it, stain it, hue it, cut it, mark it, and engrave it in my consciousness to the degree that even to this day, anytime I'm in a car, anytime I'm in any kind of automobile at all, I'm always looking out the window for a little white boy with a dog trying to get home. That's the story. But
by the way, I'm moved by the story. I'm just thinking about it. Did you ever see a kid? Doesn't matter, white boy, could be any boy. Have you ever seen anybody with a pet like that, or sick, or hurt, or injured?
in my lifetime, I've had many encounters, not just in the United States, but around the world in different countries, where I had encounters with children who were enamored with animals in some way. From nursing a calf and people being really upset that it's not going to make it, almost demolishing an abandoned building to get some kids' cat out. I have looked for those moments, and I guess, things don't have to be exact, but the opportunity to give back to someone or something that can give you nothing in return. That it makes no difference if you ever even remember me or not. I just feel just the giveaway, So I've had those moments, and I don't write those down because the whole point of that is to do it with whatever that white man did for me. I know of no motive he could have had, because there's nothing I could have done for him, but he did a whole lot for me. And this is an example where stories can, You see this in cartoons, a lot of children's books. There are two stories going on at the same time. Depending on how you listen to this, it's about race or it's about the animals and then children
I,
being
I thought
naive.
I thought you were going to tell a different story, Ray. I thought you were going to tell me the story of how you first met Chuck, and it was on the golf course, and he drove his cart into the water, and you were in the cart. Was that Ray in the cart with you that time, Chuck?
No, fortunately for Ray and our friendship, it wasn't. But that's a story I tell. And I like to
Yeah.
tell both funny stories and emotionally deep stories. And like Ray, mine are personal. And the golf cart story is just one for fun. Uh, so that your audience understands, I was playing golf, and I won't go into the whole story, but I'm not a good golfer. I hit a drive that was almost perfect. And I see the hole, and it's a raised green, so I hit my 7-wood. It looked like another perfect drive, but it fell short. And as I got closer, there was this green patch right in front of the green. So I go down, I park my cart at the top of this ridge that went down, and I look for the ball, and I'm looking left and right, and there it is. I found the ball. I took out my ball retriever. I found that ball. I picked it up, and I went back to the cart to get it. And lo and behold, the cart is going down the hill. I forgot to put the brake on. Hey, but that's not a problem.
Beautiful.
I've been watching James Bond movies since I've been 12 years old. So I knew exactly what to do. I hopped in that car. I slammed on the brake. Well, not really. I missed the brake and I hit the gas. The cart, me, my clubs all went into the water. And that's the a little bit of that story, but that's the main part of the story.
And that, Ray, I think, was the first story I ever heard Chuck tell. You know, I always remember that story whenever I think of him on that way. But the same thing with Ray's story. So where do you get your ideas for stories, Chuck?
From my life. It's just like Ray. It's that simple. I've had not as dramatic of a life as Ray has had because he was a paratrooper for 20 years. A little bit more about Ray. He's also a cultural ambassador for the State Department, traveling the world, sharing cultural stories of America. Ray is a treasure. And Ray, again, I don't want to overdo it, but man, you are so special to me and to this country, and to this world. So that's again why I tell stories, so I can meet people like Ray. And Blaine, you know that last year I had a radio show, and I think Ray was my second guest on that show. And it was a joy because I got to interview storytellers from all over the world. And now I've changed that into a podcast, as you well know. And the podcast is called In Love with the Finks. And what it is my wife and I just sit and we just tell funny stories about our 42 years of marriage. One of them was called She's Trying to Kill Me. No, I'm trying to get him off the couch. It's stuff like that. So I've continued the storytelling through the podcast.
So let me ask you both, in terms of coming up with stories, do you sometimes come up with story, in Ray's case, when he was a kid, that all of a sudden you remember 50 years later or 40 years later, and then all of a sudden you tell the story because it just hit you again, an experience you had as a kid? Does that ever happen?
Oh, all the time. And I try to let that happen. Sometimes stories don't go full circle until I've had decades to finish the story off, for it to be reflective. I got this kind of thing in my head about watching kids fight. So, I told a story about me being put in a situation when I was a kid where we were forced to fight adults for this kind of like underground fighting world where kids were used as warm-ups for real fights. So the story starts with them, but that story happened, but there's like really no end point to that. But many, many years later, decades later, I'm a soldier in Panama. My guys are throwing candy to these kids. Kids are running around trying to get the candy. Kids started, looked to me like the kids were fighting over the candy. And it just set me off. That story goes full circle because I'm reflecting back. I had no ending to that story, only but to say, now here I am as an adult, and I see this thing happen. And the reason it triggers me is for something that happened to me a long time back. Now my stories can end with why I think about stuff. Now, just that's the story. As far as like the topics, you live every day. There's stories that may be just boring, but there's no shortage of stories because most of my information stories are never interesting, but we tell them all the time to get a point across, and nobody's going to applaud for you, you know, when you're trying to give an information story. Like this is why you don't walk down the street that way because the main pipe vein blew up and then this did. That's a story, but that's not. No one's gonna say that's amazing. They're gonna thank you for the information, if it's well told. But I'm not afraid to tell stories about anything. It's just what your perspective is. This is why I say age is an advantage. Because many of the stories that happened to me as a child, even during my Army career, I didn't reach no reflection point on those stories until way after the fact. Because I was living them then. I was thinking about this is going to be a good narrative. Wonder how this is going to turn out. Some things don't turn out for a long time. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, Chuck, same question. In terms
Yes.
of once you've told a story, do you ever revisit them or change them or modify them as time goes along?
Yes, I do, but I want to backtrack just a little bit, tell you about the time that I met Ray, and he made a huge difference in my life because I was telling a story of deep personal pain, had to deal with a mental health issue that I had to
Okay.
deal with as a younger person. And Ray was in the audience. I'm not sure if he was telling or if he was just at the show, but afterwards he came up to me and Ray, I don't remember exactly what you said, but that gave me so much love and support because telling that story was not easy the first time. And that was the first time. And I've told it since, and I tell it in a different way every time. I do remember one time I told it at the Folk Arts Center on the Blue Ridge Parkway, and a lovely woman came down from the back row struggling to walk. She had MS, she had 2 canes. And part of that story is I don't define myself by that mental health condition. And she came down in tears saying for the first time in her life, it liberated her. So she didn't have to blame herself for being different than everyone else. It was acceptable for her to be her. That's why I think Ray and I tell stories. It's not just for ourselves, it's for other people. So we do change them, but it's for a purpose.
And remember, yeah, I had the pleasure of hearing that story as well. And the very first time I ever heard it, Ray, because I had heard several stories of Chuck. I'd even recorded a couple, and it was more of the humorous vein, and type of story, and he tells them very well. And that kind of blew me away, Chuck, because that's the first time, I saw, wow, this whole other side of Chuck Fink that I'd never known, and it made a difference, it got people to know you as well. Talk about that too, Chuck and Ray. I'll ask Ray the question. In terms of then, I guess there are lots of different kinds of stories to tell. Do you have a favorite kind of story you tell, Ray?
I do like to tell stories that go full circle when I can. They're just easy. They feel they're fun to tell because I'm hiding the ball from the very beginning, and I enjoy telling those if I think the audience thinks this story is going in a whole nother direction. So it's like I love those stories, and I worry about people having heard them before. So I'm thin on some stories because I don't want them. You lose some impact if people go. I know where this is going. Like Chuck probably knows where a couple of my stories are going. So, but I tell them in a way. Any stories that I can tell in a way where I can hide the ball in a way, not artificially, but like those investigative shows. They take you down all these rabbit holes that they know from the beginning, leading to no one. Right? The suspect, they know who the suspect is already. You tell the story in such a way that people get surprised. Uh, I can never be intentionally funny, and probably if I am funny, it's because I'm not being filtered. Uh, I don't know what if I do. So I like to be amusing. That's why, but I would be afraid that if I intentionally say this is a funny line, that people would go, "That's not funny," you know.
Well,
But
and I guess, yeah, I was told that too. You never tell somebody, I want to tell you a joke or, set it up, and if they don't think it's funny. But Chuck,
yeah,
same thing too. your stories tend to be, or a bunch I've seen, tend to be on the humorous side. Is that something you like doing, or?
Well, not entirely. I also have several stories that are very heartfelt and deep and have a personal meaning for me. And the reason I tell them is not just for my own satisfaction, just like I told you before, it's to try to reach other people. But in my stories, my style, whether it's humorous or very serious, I like to bring people up and then bring people down. I like the funny stuff and then all of a sudden some really poignant, tough stuff. So it's a little different than Ray because he has some twists. Mine are through the emotional up and down, which, by the way, parallels that mental health story really well, the up and down part. But it's my style, and I think every storyteller has to find their own voice, their own style, their own comfort zone, and frankly, their own discomfort zone, because it's out of that discomfort zone that great stories or good stories tend to arise.
Question, put you on the spot, and I'll ask Ray the same question too. Ballpark, how many stories do you have?
How many stories? Well, that I have in my stable, probably about 50.
Wow.
But in my life, I probably have 4,000 more.
No, incredible the 50, because I remember when you were just starting and you had like one, so to go, no, Ray, in a relatively short period of time, go from 1 to 50, that's pretty impressive,
Yeah.
And Ray, I assume you have maybe more than 50?
Yeah, maybe 150.
Yeah, I think so. Now, so you could be asked to tell any of those 150 and you could bring them up pretty much at ease?
Some of them, most of them. The thing is that a lot of those stories, within those numbers, are stories that I don't tell but once.
Gotcha.
And I have several stories that I fall in that categories once. And most of the stories that I do, like in a studio format, I couldn't do them on stage because sound design, editing, stuff like that. I wouldn't even attempt to tell some of those stories. And others for emotional reasons that once is all the performance I can give of certain stories. So maybe it might be 50 stories that I can kind of rotate around. Um, Maybe about 5 that I use for the classroom. And a lot of the stories that I tell in this format would be the same stories I'd be telling my students in the class as exemplars. But I tell a lot of one-off stories.
Chuck, if folks want to hear Ray tell stories, and I know they're going to get a chance to hear some other storytellers as well, talk about the event that's coming up.
Sure. I've been producing stories at the Weaverville Community Center since it opened in October. As a matter of fact, one of our shows opened that center. And the next one coming up for me and for Ray and hopefully for our audience is extremely special. It's called Cultural Exploration, a celebration through stories. And we have 4 very talented tellers. The creme de la creme, without a doubt, is Ray. Ray is so special. He is also the headliner very frequently in Jonesboro, the International Storytelling Center, the International Storytelling Festival, which is the Hollywood for storytellers. Ray Christian is there a lot, and he's headlined a lot. So he's really special. But the other 3 also are special in very different and special ways. Another teller is Becky Stone. Becky Stone is a Chautauqua scholar. She graduated from Vassar College with a degree in theater and singing. She takes stories of incredibly impactful Black women of history, and she becomes those women. Whether it's Rosa Parks or just anyone else, Pauli Murray, who's not as well known. But Becky brings those people to life in such a beautiful, animated, personal way. It's very, very powerful. Another teller is Jim. Jim is, let's see, Jim, I'm sorry, I want to get his last name correct here. Jim Mcdowell lives here in Weaverville, and he is a potter. And his work is all over the world in museums and galleries, but he's not known in Weaverville. The special part of Jim is his moniker is Jim the Black Potter. he'll tell the story of the first black potter, professional black potter in this country, who was an enslaved man who was given some special privileges by his quote master. And instead, he developed his skills into storytelling. And what happened is that Jim now becomes that person as he tells the story. And the last guy is a very close personal friend. He's in my men's group, Wallace Bohannon. Wallace is an absolute delight. His life stories are incredible. Like Ray, he served in the military. His was in the Vietnam era. And his stories emanate from that time and then going forward, while also bringing in his childhood. So you're just going to have 4 incredibly talented tellers with messages that we all need to hear. So I'm just so proud and privileged to be able to bring these 4 voices to the people for a free concert. It is it's a tip jar available, but these people are working literally for only tips. And when I say that about Ray and Becky, you're talking to people who make their living from storytelling, and they do it because they are excellent. So the show is on Friday, August the 19th from 7 to 8:30 at the Weaverville Community Center. And if you just Google the Weaverville Community Center, you'll see more information about it. And hopefully we'll be able to video it so that each teller will be able to put it on their websites. Ray has a wonderful website. And Ray, if I can give a little plug, last night I was watching the same story you were telling. Because Ray is so accomplished, he has a very, very professional group that will video him. So when you go to Ray Christian on YouTube, you will see some amazing stories that are so beautifully framed. So yeah, these are the kind of very special tellers, professional tellers that we'll have on the 19th at 7 o'clock.
And before I turn it over to Ray to conclude, I'm a little disappointed with you, Chuck Fink, because you're telling Ray has this professional group of people who videotape his. I think I had the honor of being the first person to videotape you, at my house, Ray, with a camera, and it's a very non-professional tape, and you want to give it to your children. Remember that the boys wanted to see it, but right. I had the honor at least being one of the first people to ever tape Chuck Fink, so I thank you for allowing me to do that.
Well, you're welcome, but believe you me, no insult at all. But Ray's crew is a little bit more professional with sound equipment and all kinds of stuff.
And Ray, I'll ask you the same question. If folks want to keep in touch with you or find out more about Ray Christian as a storyteller or some of the things you're involved in doing, what's the best bet to find out about you?
Or you could find me at drray.com. What's Ray saying? Gmail. You know what? You could probably just Google my name, and things will happen.
Okay.
After Weaverville, I'll be at Burning Man. After I get warmed up with Chuck, taking it down there.
Yeah. Okay. And you're having a film group join you, aren't you?
Yeah. Craziest thing, right? They want to follow me around. Capture the story while it's emerging.
Okay, cool. Wait, Ray, I'd like to thank you for being my guest this first half hour on the BLAINESWORLD show. Chuck Fink, as always, a pleasure seeing you, and hopefully we'll be in touch sometime next near future.
And guys, real quick plug,
yeah.
You can check me out on Chuck Fink Storyteller on YouTube and on Facebook, and that's also my website, Chuck Fink Storyteller.
Good stuff. Thanks, guys, to both of you. Speak to you soon.
Thank you.
Okay, so
Thanks. Take care.
See you soon, Ray. Bye.
Okay.
Bye, Chuck. Bye.
Okay, see you guys. Okay, I want to see if I can get my second guest in just a second. And let's see. Okay, I'm going to let Wyatt, and hopefully, Wyatt, you standing by? Wyatt, our second guest, and as great, perfect timing. Hey, Wyatt. As Wyatt's getting set up, let me just mention to folks, you're watching the BLAINESWORLD show, and we're here every week on Facebook, on YouTube, LinkedIn, a whole bunch of other places. And I'd like to welcome my second guest today, and he is an artist, a local artist, and he is Wyatt Grant. And Wyatt, you can wave to all your friends in Facebook or YouTube, LinkedIn, and this is Wyatt Grant. Wyatt Grant is an artist and designer living here in the Asheville area. Music, art, and design have intersected in many ways for the young man. This is instruction leading to a career in painting murals, designing merchandise, making screen prints, and creating sculptures. At the age of 18, he ventured to Windy City to study painting at SAIC, the School of Art Institute in Chicago, earning a Bachelor of Fine Arts degree. I have to just tell the viewers why kind of an interesting way of how we got in touch with each other. And my producer, Cappy Tassetti, tells the story. She was driving along, and she sees this beautiful mural, and she had to research it. And I guess you were the guy who did this mural?
Yep. It's a very flattering account for sure. I mean that was my first mural actually in
Oh, was it?
Asheville.
Cool.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this, Wyatt. So did you grow up in Chicago, or where'd you grow up?
So I actually grew up in Memphis, Tennessee.
Okay.
It's kind of a roundabout way I found SAIC, but I was born and raised in the South in Memphis, and I eventually went for Chicago because it was offering more of an interdisciplinary program. And so I found myself a Midwesterner for a while, and then my wife and I moved down to North Carolina, and it's been amazing.
So when did you know you wanted to be an artist? Like as a kid, were you into art and painting and drawing, all that stuff?
Yeah. I mean, it's weird because sometimes people have a transition from doing something somewhat related and then they find themselves there. But for me personally, I've always just been drawing. And I think it's usually because it leads to, doing things like comics, or, that was my first thing, doing something like Calvin and Hobbes or something, like something very simple, and just to impress my brothers. And then it just sort of art had different applications over time. When I have a band, you draw flyers and album covers. And then when you, want to do your own art, you do posters and paintings and all that kind of stuff. So, but drawing has always been a mode to me of really immediate expression. So, yeah.
Here's the question, though, to ask you. So you got into it as a kid at some point in time. Do you remember the very first time you ever got paid to do any art?
Wow, that's a good question. I think it was probably I had a piece purchased at in high school at a little show of like, it was the first time we could really show our art, not assignments,
Very cool.
and maybe it was like $20 or something, but it was the first time I felt like someone understood like the agency I had as an artist, and that kind of connection where someone wants to own a piece of that is really special, and it made me want to do more and kind of like spread my wings in that sort of realm, and like really try to make statements and to connect in that way.
Well, I'm looking at the wall behind you, and I don't see the $20 bill framed. I thought it'd be, the very first time you ever got paid to do artwork, we'd see that $20 bill or something.
Oh yeah, right. I mean, I think that would be nice. I probably spent that immediately. So yeah.
So that was cool. So you were about how old when that took place?
I think I was around 14 or 15.
Okay. So
yeah.
Go from there then. So in high school, like, did you study art or did it just go into college?
Yeah. I mean, I went to public school, and it was luckily a really, there's nothing incredibly special about the program, but the teachers and I did. I don't know. We struck a chord at some point via my sketchbooks. After class, I would kind of like show them what I was working on, and kind of it felt like I had an audience in that sense, and they could tell me and challenge me material wise, and and the form that the sketches took to push it further. And I think it was maybe junior or senior year when they really started caring about that element of like, because they could kind of see that I really wanted to do this for a living. So they were like, all right, well, we better take a look at what he's actually interested in and try and boost him up from there.
I'll put you on the
So
spot, and there's a reason I'm doing this. Do you
yeah,
remember, you mentioned you had a couple teachers. Do you remember any of the teachers' names?
yeah, Miss Curlin and Miss Winston.
Okay, cool.
Um,
Are
yeah,
you still in touch with them?
I'm not. Neither of them work there. Work at the high school anymore. But uh, I've thought about them constantly though in this stage of my life. I think like especially the stage where I'm doing it for a living.
Okay.
So
But
yeah,
here's the challenge I'll share with you. I'm saying this as a
yeah,
former teacher. That's what I have
sure,
done in my
sure,
life. See if
sure.
you can dig them up on Facebook or LinkedIn or somehow and
Yes,
send them a
absolutely.
copy of this clip, because
Yeah,
people don't do that enough for teachers. Seriously, teachers will get
yeah,
such a thrill out of this, seeing that they made a difference. And that hopefully we can track them down again. But it's so cool you
absolutely.
remember them. And
Yeah, of course.
if you can give a shout out or same thing, when you talk about college experience, if you remember
Yeah.
any names or something, just drop them a note.
Oh, absolutely.
Like
Yeah.
I'll same thing
I'll
to.
give a shout out to Fraser Taylor, who was my college
Okay.
professor, and we still stay in touch.
Okay, well
Um,
then, Fraser Taylor, if you're listening, thank you for
yeah,
making this show possible, and we'll send them a copy of the clip. But so cool that you do, because
absolutely.
yeah, I was blessed. I'd been in touch with my college teacher for like 40 years afterward, and it's
Yeah,
just a great experience. So
yeah,
thank you for sharing that. So you
of
went
course.
to high school, you started doing the sketchbooks. In college,
Yeah.
what kind of art did you specialize in, or what was your interest?
I went to the school to focus on painting and printmaking. I hadn't been able to do as much printmaking as I'd like without the right facilities. So with printmaking, it really depends on so much on the facilities, being able to wash out a screen and burn a screen for screen printing. And so for me personally, going to the school and having those facilities was really the most important was the most important shift for me into deeper and deeper into the world of printmaking, which kind of motivated my work so much more, I feel. I ended up, instead of going into just painting and printmaking, I found that the only way I could get into a screen printing class as a freshman was to go to the fiber and material studies department, which was totally alien to me. They mostly have fashion students and weavers and textile makers, and I was just kind of an image maker, painting, drawing, whatever, all that kind of stuff. But when I went to this department, it felt a lot less precious. Like, they had these big tables with like pinned down fabric, and people were eating their lunch on their, on their projects, and it felt much more of a forgiving environment to build up your way of image making and concept building and everything. So I ended up staying in that department through the end of my graduation in senior year, and that I feel that department helped animate a lot of my interest in flat images and one color images, and especially with scale. You can only really screen print a certain size of an image, but this place helped me get covering the whole wall in something, or doing like 60 layers of screen print on fabric. So it I think that energized me a lot more to experiment. And yeah.
And talk a little bit about then, so the experimenting you did and the artwork you did. So you
Mhm,
graduate from college, and then all of a
mhm.
sudden, day one, are you an artist, or what happened that day one that got you into your professional career?
It's interesting. Right after school, I had to focus on paying off my student loans,
Right.
honestly. And so that led me into the workforce. And I've always had my studio. And today actually was day one of me moving into finally a quite large space where I can actually spread out. So that's why I'm, not surrounded by a lot of art. And this is just our office room. Um, I've moved into a full studio today, so that's really
Oh,
cool.
very exciting.
Yeah, and but from the professional realm, I had to manage a warehouse for the last several years, I moved to Asheville 2 years ago, and right before that, the last several years, I was managing a warehouse and playing in a band in Chicago, and also doing artwork. And so that hustle, I suppose, was a bit difficult, but I think it also made me a lot more resolute in the way that I want to go about it, because you always got to troubleshoot in terms of like bringing any part-time thing into full-time. So the last couple of years, I've just been doing full-time art and design work in Asheville, and so that's been a really fantastic transition, but it's not seamless. You know, they're just there are, you know, there's an evolution in your practice that takes place that is valuable to appreciate the nuance of it, because if something doesn't work, then that failure is kind of a really enriching thing and something that animates what you do later on. And I feel like Asheville was had open arms to that kind of thing. So yeah.
Well, I was going to ask you then, what got you to Asheville then?
So my mom lives nearby Asheville, and we've always visited Asheville and really loved it here. And my now wife and I, before we were married, we always wanted to move from Chicago to Asheville, but we were always waiting for the right time. And knowing Asheville already, like I knew that it wouldn't be, I would have to really prepare myself to go completely full time if I really wanted to, you know, stand out or try to do something important here. So I think Chicago just kind of was a great support system and boot camp for preparing me to go to a place that I really love and appreciate the nature and the community that they have here.
And so talk now that you're in Asheville now, you have the studio, very exciting.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about your art, because frankly, that's one of the reasons I asked you to come on board. What kind of art do you do?
Yeah.
And
So
can you show it also as you talk
absolutely, absolutely. So the kind of art that I've been making just in the last couple of years has been shifted a lot more towards commissions, and you know, as it's been a living for me, that helps support my like fine art practice. So some of the things that I'll show you guys, my most recent project with Moog is being released over time, and you can check that out on the Moog website. But I'll show you right before that, starting with the most recent mural that I did, just finished last month in Raleigh, North Carolina. So
now, hold on that thought, because that's kind of a neat thing as well. So all of a sudden, then, was this the first mural that you had done, or?
So actually, the one that Capri was describing
Right.
was the first mural that I did in Asheville, and that was the first place I worked here. Not to go through a long account of my work and whatnot, but I worked at Citizen Vinyl as my first job, working at the record counter, and I was selling records, and because I love music and I'm a musician, and that's that's a place where I was also selling my prints, like sort of on the side. So Justin Roebuck and Colby Caldwell introduced me into that world and gave me, you know, this part-time employment that really helped boost me up. And from there, I met, you know, multiple people that I was able to connect with, designers, and one of them happened to be the designer for West Asheville Family Vet, Eric Piper. He goes by Homestead as a designer. But he and I have become friends since then, and he asked me to do a mural or to discuss it with West Asheville Family Vet, and I ended up doing that for them, and it was a really it was immediately the largest mural I've ever done, and a very you know, for my first mural in Asheville, right on Haywood Road, you know, that was a tough bill to fill, but I feel like it was a really cool experience that I got with the community and with the client, and I really got to have a really a beautiful experience doing it. So
How
yeah,
long did it take you?
that one took me exactly 3 weeks to paint. I had scaffolding, so that was I had to take it down and put it up every morning. So
Wow.
myself, and I kept it actually in one of their dog kennels, like on the inside of the vet. But this is before they were in business, so you know it was all good. You know there were no dogs involved at the moment.
By chance, do
So
you have? Can you show that, or do you have a picture of that?
I don't have a picture of the putting it away, but I'm going to share my
Oh
screen
yeah,
and show you the actual mural.
I'd love to
All
see it.
right.
Yeah, please.
Okay. So can you see everything right
Yeah,
now?
that's great. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay. All
Oh,
right.
here it is. Wow.
So yeah, so this is the mural that I did on Haywood. Um, and you know, it's quite a large, as you can tell by the stop sign scale, it's pretty big in scale.
Now,
And
had
it
you
was
ever done?
also
Yeah, had you ever done anything like that before?
so I had done 3 or 4 murals in Chicago ahead of this, but I had never done anything near this scale. So I ended up, you know, using all 80 feet of this wall, but also, you know, up to 16 feet high because that's as long as my scaffolding could reach. Um, but yeah, this was a really great experience. As you can see, I used a brush
What,
for all
what,
of it.
what was the reaction of people to it?
Um, I actually did see someone have a car accident while I was painting it. It was just a small one, just a very small one, and they moved along. But I actually met a lot of people that are currently friends uh, through this, just riding their bikes, or the people from the neighborhood going on a morning walk. And you know, a lot of little kids came up and asked what I was doing for each of these little, you know, characters, and it was really cool because I got their immediate feedback, and that was quite nice. And then the interesting thing was right after this, I did the Moog mural in a week, and then right after that, I got married, and after that, went on my honeymoon, and after that, went to Germany for my first solo show over there. So it was a very intense period of you know, new experiences, but it was really fantastic.
And talk a little bit about the. You were starting to talk about the Moog mural. What was that about?
Yeah, yeah. I had actually just gotten in touch with Moog about maybe about 6 months before I started doing these murals, and I'll take it off share really quick. So right before I had done the you know, West Asheville mural, I had talked to them about doing a mural in their studio sort of like lounge, where they'll, you know, have a private sort of experience for people who come to town to play performances and all that. And there's a studio upstairs. And supposedly they're going to be doing some sessions in front of the mural, and you know, videotape it much like your show, you know, just have performances going, and I'm really excited for that to be a visual component of that. And then from there, they really liked the mural, so we expanded on that to make it into a clothing line that just ended up coming out recently uh, via the Moog website. So we did several T-shirts and keychains and all that kind of stuff, and it was a really cool experience.
Okay.
And
I assume that's not the shirt you're wearing now. That's not
oh no
no.
no, this was a $5 at a thrift store, but
All right.
yeah, I wish I had some around to show you, but
Well,
again, I
but
moved
if you
to
can, I think you said you can show it to us through the
yeah,
website.
absolutely. So let's see. Just, yeah, I mean, it was a really cool experience to, let's see, I'll show it to you right now. Let's see. So these are just
Wow.
the designs for the textiles or the actual t-shirts and whatnot. Um, it was the first of its kind for me because it contained a lot of different elements for the company, and their brand was already something I was really familiar with as a musician. Um, so we were able to, make a lot of different. Uh, I don't even feel like it's necessarily merchandise because they felt like it was like 3D art in a lot of ways. But I can also show you the mural. So this is what kind of came first, and then we adapted a lot of these elements um,
Now,
for the.
when you were starting the project, did you even
Mhm.
think in the back of your mind that some of it could be T-shirts and keychains? Was that
No, I actually didn't.
how cool is
Well,
that?
actually, okay. I'll actually, I'll take that back actually, because when I drew this keyboard in the middle, um, I, I proposed to Moog that I would do a mural because they had an open call and for their outside, and they ended up going with a different artist for the outside of their factory. So, I hadn't heard back from them, and I figured they'd gone with someone else, and that's totally fine. For artists, we realize that for everything you propose, it doesn't always go through. So I had just personally taken that keyboard and put it on a mock-up shirt just for fun, just on my own, and I had no idea that eventually that keyboard would be literally this one on a t-shirt.
Beautiful.
So I mean, I can't stress enough that it was a dream come true to be able to work with a client like that. And you know, it put me into it put me into a different realm personally as an artist, to how to work with people and their brand, uh, and adapting that to products that people like. So yeah.
And talk a little bit about then some of the other stuff you're doing. So really impressed. I mean, those two projects are just phenomenal. What are you working on now?
Right now, I actually just finished a couple of projects. One I just did at Citizen Vinyl, the place that I had originally worked for my first job. They asked me to do a mural in their space, so I came back there as a full-time artist, I guess, and was able to do my thing, and that was really wonderful. Um, right now, I'm about to deliver 4 paintings to Virginia for a commission. And well, I'm sitting next to one of them right now, and we have a
Beautiful.
few right here. Um, and so I'm going to do that on Wednesday, but tomorrow I'm moving into my studio, so it's going to be mostly that this week, and working on that.
I guess as an artist too, you love that word commission. You know that's
Yeah, yeah.
those are your best gigs
Gordon.
when you get it there. Well,
Mhm.
talk about you said studio now. So talk about like where were you doing your work beforehand, and then where are you now?
Yeah, right now I'm in a spare room in our apartment. My wife and I live here, and this was my full-time studio. So you still see a couple of things hanging on the wall, but otherwise it's kind of bare. It's not. We have her desk over there, but otherwise all my equipment's gone and everything. So um, I'm I mean, I'd say maybe this is 140 square feet, and I'm moving into an 1,100 square foot space, so I'll have plenty of space to spread out, and I'm sharing it with a really good friend of mine, Danny Reed, who runs Crooked Creek Holler in Nashville. They're gonna have all of their activity based in that floor, and they've been a really good creative comrade group for me, and so yeah, I'm very excited to share a space with them.
Now, as an artist, I ask this of writers, but I've never asked it of an artist. Is this something you do every day? Like, do you get up at 7 o'clock in the morning or 5 o'clock in the morning and paint or draw or do something every day for a couple of hours?
Yeah, I mean, I do think it's actually surprisingly literal in that, like, I'm very used to getting up early, at least as a morning person. I really love to like uh, to have a really good amount of time of free drawing, and just to always keeping my hand. and maintaining a healthy relationship with the medium rather than, just doing work. So I always have, which I do so much work that I love, and I'm very grateful for that as well. And sometimes I just wake up on the weekend and I'm like, I'm ready to, work on a client's project, and I'm lucky that that's the case.
Where do you get your ideas from?
Uh, you know, I like to feel like whenever I'm commissioned to do something, I have a good amount of time to sit with this idea and again do like kind of a free association drawing period where I spend a couple of days on any given a project just drawing, just not putting anything in the computer or anything like that, just having a very physical experience with the images I'm creating. And maybe I'm using ink or just a pen or paint even. But I always like to just have a, clear off the table, just go back to drawing every time. So that's where I feel like most of the ideas come to the surface, is because for me it's a lot about draftsmanship, about working from one idea and letting that idea evolve and become different things through a kind of series of like barriers that you have, like, all right, well, I'll let this pass through, this isn't good, and it over time unveils something interesting.
Back to the question I asked you earlier, before you even got into high school, like as a little kid, 5-year-old, 6-year-old kid, were you always drawing and painting and coloring? Like,
Yeah,
you folks
yeah, yeah.
encourage you?
Surprisingly, I mean, yeah, my parents didn't necessarily think I was going to try to become a full-time artist. I think at that age, of course, because a lot of kids love drawing and
Right, right.
whatnot. But I feel like when I hit middle school and high school, they could see that I was in all the clubs and really like only on the weekends I was like getting together with my friends and doing projects like this, or working on these skills, and I was getting kind of absorbed in music and art culture. So I think it wasn't really, when it hit senior year and I was looking at these colleges, they were like, really, like, are you going to become an art teacher or something? But and I can't blame them in some ways, but I they nurtured it all along, I feel, and they really recognized that this was my passion from an early age, and I'm very grateful for it, and having people believe in me to that level. So yeah.
If folks want to find out more about Wyatt Grant, what's the best bet?
Yeah, so wyattgrant.com is my website. So that's the easy one. But on Instagram, I'm at WY Grant. So WYGRANT. And that's on Instagram. I don't go on Facebook as much these days, but I've started to pop by in the last couple months. So that's what I'm definitely gonna start catching up with that medium.
Okay. Well, anyway, I want to thank you for being my guest on the second half hour of the BLAINESWORLD show. This
Yeah,
is
thank
really
you.
cool. I think the first person I've interviewed who does murals, which is just an amazing thing unto itself. And it seems like you do about 27 other things simultaneously. Lots of luck in the new studio. I'll give you a chance one more time to give contact information.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. You can definitely contact me either through my website, wyattgrant.com, or through Instagram at WYGRANT.
And the best bet, if they want to see that one mural you showed, beautiful mural for the vet, where's that?
That's on Halstead by the Calvary Baptist Church, so in West Asheville. If you go near the Whale and Fleetwoods and all those kind of places, you'll definitely see it.
Okay. Well,
Yeah.
anyway, thank you for being my guest. And stay with me. We're going to stop recording and then just stay with me for a second. I'll wrap up.
Okay.
Thanks, Wyatt. Great.
Absolutely.